Hello and welcome to the Six Sales podcast. My name is Mike Nicholson from Six Sales. Today I'm going to be speaking to Ben at Lumen. And talking of Lumen, big thank you to the team at Lumen Research for sponsoring the Six Sales podcast. For those that don't know who Lumen Research are, they're a company that help brands and media agencies to plan, buy, measure and optimize towards real human attention. So thank you to the team at Lumen for sponsoring, and thank you for Ben for being on the podcast. How are you?
I'm very good, thanks. And it's a welcome back because I've realised that I was on episode 3 of this podcast.
Wow.
Back in COVID times.
Were you at Playground?
I was at Playground back then. Yeah.
You were, you're right. Was it number 3?
It was number 3, so I would say back by popular demand, but you know, you've done 105 episodes since. So
yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah. We had Matt Stockbridge, who was at episode number 1 back just recently. Right, it feels like I've just gone back to the beginning of the playlist and started again, doesn't it?
You've done everyone. No, you're doing all
get Liam Brennan, who was at Mediacom at the time, maybe. Well, welcome back.
Thank you.
Talking of Playground and 102 episodes ago, could you give us a little bit of a potted history of your career to date, please?
Yeah, I'll try not to bore you too much with my history. But I started in media at an agency, like many people do. So I was at one of the Omnicom agencies, Manning Gottlieb OMD. And I was actually there. I was planning and buying print. So I decided I wanted to move into the world of digital. This was in like 2011. And I started working. I moved from print to digital, and I moved from agency to the sales side. So I started working for a company called Fullscreen, which is, of course, where we met.
Indeed. Happy days.
Yeah, Fullscreen, which turned into Opera, which turned into Ad Colony, and so it's Fullscreen was the original name, and of course it was a mobile advertising platform or company called Fullscreen because, of course, back then mobile was sort of this new thing. It was like, right, it's going to be the fourth screen that we look at, which is kind of funny when we think about it now.
Showing our age.
Yes, it is. And we went through the years of mobile and all this sort of jazz. So I was there and obviously Fullscreen did a lot of work around creative, you know, how we build like creative advertising, rich media type of thing, which was, you know, that was a real big growing trend then. From Fullscreen, I went to set up a company in EMEA called Playground XYZ. That was an Australian startup company. They, again, were involved in understanding and building cool creatives for brands, again, on mobile devices. And interestingly, that was sort of my foray into attention because sort of Playground had these amazing ads. We knew they were beautiful ads and that they were built with great UX so that they were really eye-catching. But it was a cluttered market space, lots of people doing sort of rich media. So we needed something to help us sort of cut through, and going in and saying, we think the ads are beautiful, we think the ads are eye-catching, just wasn't, you needed to see it sort of almost numerically. You needed to see the evidence of that. And the metrics that everyone was using at the time just didn't cut it. Like your ads didn't have to be eye-catching to get good viewability. Your ads didn't have to be eye-catching to get click-through rate. You know, there's ways you can do that without them being great creatively. And it's what led us down this path of, well, if they're eye-catching, they'll catch people's eye. What's that? Well, that's kind of feels like it's attention. It will garner attention from people. And that really, the business really evolved from there, from sort of a creative company into an attention measurement business. So I was there for 8 years overall, and used to come up against Lumen a lot in the market because, of course, we were doing very similar things. We always had a very kind relationship with each other because it's sort of rising tide lifts all boats sort of thing. So both trying to move the conversation forward around attention. And this year I actually moved over to join Mike and the team at Lumen.
So congrats.
Yeah, thank you.
Enjoying it?
I'm loving it. Yeah.
Excellent. So you mentioned our time at Fullscreen, but even going back to MGMD, you were planning and buying attention, but you probably never called it that because attention was a thing that was always assumed that happened once you did your planning and your buying, right? So, and then you had the Playground, 8 years at Playground. Wow, that's a long time in media, isn't it? Like eight years. Yeah. And now Lumen. How long have you been at Lumen now? Is it 6 months?
6 months.
6 months, yeah. So you've seen the attention story, if you like, evolve from various different viewpoints. Where would you say it's come from briefly? Where do you think we are now as it relates to attention metrics, and where do you think it's going?
I mean, attention is the cornerstone of advertising, isn't it? Like, from the dawn of advertising, we make ads and we put them in places in the hope that people look at them. And through different, through traditional media, through the sort of as the media's evolved, we've used attention, as ways to better plan and buy our media. It's just that it was called a different thing, I think. So you used to work in print as well. You were at the Telegraph, weren't you? And
I was digital at the Telegraph though, but I was print at the Evening Standard.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So I was probably I don't think I ever bought any ads off you, but I was buying ads off your colleagues, I think.
Yeah.
And I'd be negotiating with them. It's like, you got to get me the right hand page, and you got to get me in the first 25% of the paper. These were all sort of metrics that came from research and also probably a bit of nous, that people are more likely to look at an ad on the right hand page or on the first 25% of the paper. So, and the same with TV, first ad, last ad and break. It's when we think people are going to come back from making their cup of tea and they're going to probably see the ad. So attention these are sort of attention-esque things to think about. The reason why the conversation has really reared up, I think, in the last 5 years is just the evolution of technology. And that really, like, eye tracking has actually been around for a long time. Lumen's been doing eye tracking, research for 13 years, I think it is now. So the eye tracking's been around, but there's been an evolution of eye tracking. The fact that you don't have to go into a lab anymore and put on headsets, the fact that it uses front-facing camera technology means you can just scale eye tracking panels like you never be able to before. And that sort of happened in like 2018 age. And what that meant is you can collect lots more eye tracking data than ever before. You can do it in a way that's more natural to the user, so your data is going to be better quality. And it just gives you this big mound of data. And then the other thing that's evolved in time is the use of predictive modeling and AI. Like, that's now commonplace. 2025, it's commonplace in our industry, but it wasn't 20 years ago, of course. And so now we're able to measure attention at scale. And when we say attention, we were able to tell advertisers, hey, look, we can tell you what ads people looked at, and we can tell you how long they looked at them for, and we can do this at scale, and we can do this live on your campaign, and so that really was a huge step forward in attention. That sort of, as I say, was about 5 years ago when all that stuff was happening. And really, when that came out, it was all really exciting. So, we've never been able to know this at scale before. And so it's like viewability, for those people listening who don't know what viewability is, that's sort of a measure of the ads on the screen. So did the ad make it onto the screen? Was it in the viewport? But now it's like, now we can tell you if people actually looked at the ad when it was on the screen. It's sort of the next big step forward. So that would cause a lot of excitement and people doing tests. And, I think where it has gone from that era to now is really an understanding of what does it mean, linking it to outcomes. Like, attention isn't an outcome. And I think most brands know that. Then we're not in this space to try and get attention. We're trying to advertise to get people to remember something or to get them to go and buy something so we can earn money. That's the ultimate goal of advertising. So it's moved now, I think, into an era of, well, what are people looking at ads mean to those downstream effects?
Yeah. Yeah, and as you say, attention isn't a new thing. Like, if you think of the ADA model, attention is the first one, right? Attention, interest, desire, and action. But for me, it feels like attention was assumed on behalf of a brand. We'll do loads of advertising, and good things will happen at a campaign level, and so people must have paid attention, and that makes sense. The early right hand, I remember it well. Like, people were like fiercely negotiating to get pages 5, 7, 9 because of that early right hand. But again, there was some research done, and it was a bit of nous, I think you called it, which totally makes sense. But there was no ability to actually track that and see how much more attention and what that attention actually did. And now that we've got so much rich data now with firstly Playground and then moving on to Lumen, where brands can really do that. So how do you see brands using this data in order to create more effective media campaigns?
Yeah, so really for a brand, the best thing to do is to start understanding how much attention that they're able to garner from their media. Many brands won't know many brands won't know how much attention they're getting across different channels. And so it's really important to know that for a number of reasons. But ultimately, what we're looking to do with brands is partner with them so we can help them understand what their business challenges are, what their objectives are, and how attention can help with those things. So a lot of the time it's how can we better understand how media can drive outcomes for them. And outcomes, vary because, of course, it depends on the brand. Typically, it's around memory or money, as our CEO, Mike, always says, memory and money. So, are people remembering your brand? So that's a lot of the time measured via things like brand lift, awareness, recall, consideration. Money, typically ROI, measured via econometrics. And if that's what a brand is looking to as an outcome, how do we help them understand how much attention, what dosage of attention do they need in order to drive those? It's an expansive area. There's lots of testing that's required to really nail it down. But it's incredibly interesting because, of course, for not every brand is the same, and not every brands have the same, status in category. Not every brand has the same creative assets, and they definitely don't have the same goals either. So that means how we approach it could change slightly, and how much attention they require will change slightly.
So you used the word dosage of attention there. So is it true then that perhaps bigger brands need less attention than smaller brands, or different campaign objectives might need different types of attention? And if that is true, how do you kind of figure that out?
Yeah, so definitely it's true to say that not all brands need the same level of attention to drive outcomes. And some of those things that can change that might be the size of the brand. And, if we think of someone like Coca-Cola, I know they get used all the time, but Coca-Cola...
I literally was just thinking of them when you said that. I was thinking, with
Exactly.
Coca-Cola, you only need to just scan it. It reminds you, yeah.
So,
good mental availability.
Yeah, but we can think about anyone who spent, billions upon billions in advertising over the last 50 years, have hugely recognizable assets. McDonald's is another one you could put in there. Heinz, you don't even probably have to, you could even see a color and maybe a shape, and you're going to recognize them. What does that mean for attention? Well, if you then put that together with what they're trying to accomplish with their advertising, this term jobs to be done, are we trying to get someone to, just to remember it, to take a bit of their sort of mental availability, to remember that ad as they go in to, into the high street? Or are we trying to educate them and, convince them to go and buy something? Is it an emotional thing? Are we trying to get them to feel a certain way? This is like what McDonald's do a lot of at the moment. I think their ads are fantastic, but they've moved from a world when I was a kid and it was all about Ronald McDonald and Happy Meals and buy this new burger that we've got out. And now they seem to sort of insert themselves into sort of culture with some of their advertising, really clever. But in terms of that emotional driver they're trying to put in, what does that mean? Like, do we need how much attention? Can you get that emotion across in very low levels of attention? Do you need lots of attention in order to do it? And therefore, if we can understand that, how do we help them better plan and buy media off the back of it?
Yeah. Talking of McDonald's, I remember something that struck me, only because I work in the business, obviously, but there's a North Cheam, there's a McDonald's everywhere, obviously, but it's not far from where I live. And there's a big golden arches outside it. And I was driving towards North Cheam. It was quite early in the morning, I think, quite a grey day, it's quite dark. And there was a bus in the distance that was actually blocking the golden arches from view. But there was a yellow glow over the top of the bus, and it just caught my eye, and I immediately thought of McDonald's. You think, my God, I didn't even see the actual logo or anything; just the glow off the top of it just triggered that McDonald's thing. Interesting.
It's so powerful, isn't it? And so for a brand that doesn't have that, so they haven't spent billions in advertising over the last 50 years, and their assets aren't as recognizable as a McDonald's. What do they need to do now? It's really important to know these things, because if you need someone to pay more attention to your ad for that message to go in, or to be convinced of a certain thing, it's important to know that, because it might mean that you're buying ineffective media, essentially, because you're not buying enough attention for people to actually resonate with your ads. So there is a potential that larger brands need less attention because they've got a higher baseline awareness. And, it's this concept of almost double jeopardy, that. And so maybe it's easier for brands to, we did actually a white paper in my last company around this exact topic called optimal attention. And it really there was a section in this white paper that looked at this exact area, which, large brands with a higher baseline awareness needed less attention to drive, outcomes higher. So that means that potentially they can benefit from buying maybe lower attention media, which sometimes comes at a lesser cost, means they can get more reach. That sounds like bad news for an advertiser who doesn't have that high baseline awareness. But what it does mean is they invest their media in the right areas. So they're not buying low wastage. They're not buying lots of wastage with low attention. And the other thing is it means their biggest competitors, the sort of market leaders, aren't competing with them to buy the same types of media, because it might be that they need completely different strategies. Yeah.
I was talking to a guy that's just that works at an independent agency just recently about this, and this idea of underpriced attention. Well, firstly, he was saying that a lot of agencies will have a media plan that kind of rinse and repeat, that build it, and then you just take the names off, take the year off, put it back together again, and that's fine. But if the brand that you use that particular schedule for is less known, let's say, for argument's sake, less mental availability, then it might be that media plan doesn't work anywhere near as well as it did for the brand that was really well known, because the levels of attention in that campaign are like maybe fleeting, whereas it might be that you need a different campaign for that. And we were talking about an idea which I thought was really interesting. There must be little pockets of the internet where there's huge attention, but they're not like sexy positions. I'll give you an example. When I worked at the Telegraph, we had a picture gallery page where you could just scroll through pictures and people would stay on it for 2 or 3 minutes. So an ad around a picture gallery probably gets tons of attention just because of the amount of time you're there and you're engaged, you're actually engaging with the page. But no one thinks I must be around the picture galleries unless you're Kodak or something like that, I guess. But so I wonder if there's like tons and tons of little bits of the internet where it gets really, really good attention, but has hitherto been kind of ignored because it's not on the front page or it's not on the right-hand page. To use the print analogy, it's not the mega banner on the homepage and stuff like that. What do you think?
Yeah, I think because of the metrics, by and large, that the industry uses today, the commonplace metrics, there is probably these pockets of attention that people aren't paying attention to, that they're not noticing. And there's a really good opportunity for brands to seek those out from using attention measurement. So we were
talking about challenger brands trying to seek these places out because they could probably buy them cheaper because there's less demand, and get better results because there's more attention.
Exactly. Yeah, definitely. I also think what's quite interesting is attention. Sort of, it's so varied across the whole advertising ecosystem. And as I was sort of talking about there, is potentially advertisers need different levels of attention to try and hit their goals. But then if you compare that to viewability, super interesting, isn't it? The industry sort of said, well, actually, no, we just need one number, which means it's really easy to adopt. And everyone knew what they were heading for, this kind of 70% viewability threshold that everyone wanted. But that was 70% no matter whether you were McDonald's or whether you were this small up-and-coming brand selling, mobile phone cases or something. Everyone needs 70%. Of course, that changed a little bit as it evolved, but it's too static. That doesn't at all allow for the nuance and the complexity of advertising, which of course is extremely deep.
And are you trying to tell a story, or are you just trying to nudge someone as well?
Exactly.
That's a big difference, isn't it?
Yeah.
So in Cannes this year, I saw Henna, who's the head of media at Carlsberg, on stage. Probably the best talk. I've murdered that. If Carlsberg did Cannes talks, probably be the best talk in the world, something like that.
Missed an opportunity.
Anyway, I messed that right up, but you get my point. And she was talking about how Carlsberg have gone on an attention journey with Lumen. I think Mike was on stage with her, and Les Binet and a few others. What's an attention journey, Ben? And why does a brand go on one? And what do they get out of that?
Put simply, an attention journey is a way to understand how attention can be embedded in their overall sort of marketing strategy. there's so many things you can learn about attention. So many things you can use attention to learn and to help you with. So best not try and do everything at once because you end up not learning anything. So an attention journey really is we sit down with a brand like Carlsberg and we say, what are your goals? What are your challenges? And attention can't help with them all. It's not a silver bullet, but it can be useful in some instances. And so we pull out what we think attention could help with, and we put together a plan, and we put it together in stages. And so someone like Carlsberg, we work with over a long term, and we work, in stages. So right at the moment, we're going to learn this. We're going to learn, potentially what your norms are and how we better plan to attentive reach. And now we're going to learn how we can link it to outcomes. And now we're going to learn how we can optimize more effectively. And now do we need to have a look at your creative? So, like I say, best to do that as a journey, so it evolves in time. And Carlsberg's really interesting. I mean, they're a fantastic partner of ours and really interesting as a brand. You said it right there. We know that the sort of the iconic line of probably the best beer in the world. They've got sort of this. They've got this behind them, but of course they need to keep fresh for younger audiences, right? So how do you keep that alive whilst trying to appeal to different audiences who, as we know, are consuming content in different channels, and in those channels we have less attention. So how do we best advertise in those channels to help to keep that brand message alive? So the work we've done with Carlsberg specifically has started off really kind of understanding what we call the Carlsberg effect, like understanding how do consumers pay attention to their ads, and therefore we take that and we help them understand, how to better plan, what their benchmarks might be on different channels and what their weightings should be on different channels in order to sort of try and be more successful. But as that evolves over time, it's looking at attention versus outcomes data and all, optimization and that type of thing. So does that kind of answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So that's a longer term embedding attention into the planning, the measuring, the benchmarking, and then eventually the delivery of campaigns. I suppose with everything these days, what's the ROI is quite often a question, isn't it? So have you got an example of another brand that you work with, or maybe it could be Carlsberg again, I don't know, but a brand where they were buying in a certain way and then they went through maybe a mini attention journey or maybe just a benchmarking exercise and were able to increase the ROI without increasing the budget?
We are working with brands now, and I won't sort of name in case they wouldn't want to be named, but we're working with brands now where we link attention to their econometrics data, which obviously is sort of where we have an understanding of ROI. Now that's interesting because econometrics data is sort of is almost like that's the result, that's the outcome. But attention is not the outcome. But what attention is interesting for is that it is a leading indicator of things. And so if we can do work with brands where we connect attention to the outcome, then we can understand if there is a relationship there and it's a good relationship, you can use attention to move things around on your campaign. Like you can do it to a certain extent with your MMM data. You can do it sort of like we know from our MMM data that we should be investing more in TV and less over here, etc. But attention allows you to go more granular, past just channel. Some MMM data doesn't split out social, for instance, because of the confidence level it needs to put things together. So we can get more granular into not just into what exact social platform, but like potentially what formats in social, or what creatives are you running, or what targeting groups. So you get really, really granular. It means you can start making adjustments. And so with that, yes, you can start saying, if you make these adjustments, we can see through the correlation that you'll start seeing improvements in ROI. Longer term, and this is where it gets super interesting, is where brands have so much confidence, and we're starting to speak to some really large brands about this exact thing. They have so much confidence in attention as a quality signal. You start having it as an input into econometrics models to help, get the predictions more accurate and add that level of granularity. And so then we start to think about it more causally as an input into driving long-term profit.
Okay. You mentioned leading indicator there, which reminds me of a study that Ebiquity put out, I think it was last year, using Lumen data amongst others. So they're obviously in the business of auditing media and trying to find where effectiveness is. And there was a big study done with Ebiquity and Lumen. So could you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yes. So this was at the end of last year, and I think this really was the first study of its kind, and really interesting directional results that came from it. So yeah, the data set that it was based off was the Profitability 2.0 data set from WPP and ThinkBox. So that was obviously a combination of lots of different MMM data. And what we did with Ebiquity is take the attention data and overlay it on top of that data. So we can start to see, is there a relationship between placements that have high levels of attention and that drive high long-term profit? You can kind of, I don't know if you link to the white paper, but we can. Yeah, or you can, please, if anyone's listening wants to see it, you can find it on the Lumen website or Ebiquity's website. But in there is just there's a sort of a perfect graph that kind of just encapsulates the whole thing, which you just see this really strong line of correlation. R squared score of 0.97. Basically, 97% of long-term profit can be explained by attention. Now, why that's interesting? Wasn't brand specific. It was from a grouping of lots of different MMM results from lots of different brands, which is good because, of course, that makes the data set nice and robust. But for individual brands, really now what we're starting to do, we've done it now with a few brands where we do it on their own data set. When you get to that level of confidence that there's a relationship there between the two things, that's when you say, now how do we use attention as a leading indicator to help us plan and buy and optimize our media? It's work that I haven't seen much work like this for things like clicks or video completion rate. It was more assumed, back to our right-hand page thing, right? Yeah. Probably right-hand pages work better.
Probably more clicks is good.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, clicks. They seems like intent, doesn't it? Maybe we should optimize towards clicks. And, it's still a huge part of our industry where people are optimizing towards clicks, last click attribution, and, things like viewability. Really, for brands, it's just this constant question of, is this thing actually driving long-term profit, long-term effect for us? Is there something better out there? Now, what we're doing at Lumen is trying to help them show that through research, like the Ebiquity research, that there is a relationship, but not just to trust it, just come and do it for yourself. See if that relationship exists on your own data.
So that's full loop then, isn't it? If you can get to the point where you know that attention is the leading indicator you can optimize in real time towards in order to drive those econometric results at the end, and then that keeps feeding itself, then you've made it then, haven't you? Basically, you know what to do while planning and buying, and you know that always has a positive effect on the outcome.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, really, the full closed loop is you start by planning to attentive reach, and then you move down into measuring and optimizing, and then you move down to sort of seeing if that has had an effect on your on things like long-term profit. Yeah. Now, there'll be people listening. It's like, well, we already do that because we take our MMM data and we use it to help us plan. So we do have an idea of what's driving long-term profit for us and how we should plan media. So it's kind of maybe it doesn't sound like that new, but what attention can be is it's this common currency that goes all the way from the top right down to the bottom, gives that level of granularity. But also, and really importantly, it links together creative and media, which we haven't seen much of before. So you can take a piece of creative and say, how much attention does this get? You can look at media channels and placements and say, how much attention does this get? And when you've linked it back, it's like, we know that we need a certain threshold of attention before we start to see an outcome happen. Yeah. Therefore, we need to relook at that creative, or we need to relook at the channels that we're buying or the placements we're buying.
But the difference as well, isn't it, if I've understood this correctly, is that there's media being planned and bought, not using attention, let's say, and yes, of course, that will have a positive effects on the econometric results at the end. But what you're saying, I think, not putting words in your mouth, but what I think you're saying is if you plan and buy that media using attention metrics, it will work even better and you'll get even stronger ROI at the end because you're cutting out the positions the placements that perhaps don't get attention at all, but they're still costing you money and they're still in the plan, taking those out and optimizing towards the right amount of attention. Does it get attention? Yes. Okay, tick, we'll have some of that. And does it get the right what did you call it? Dosage of attention. Yes, tick. Well, we'll have that. And then what happens at the end? That's what you're essentially trying to prove, right?
Yeah, I think so. And to put another sort of spin on that as well is the granularity bit. I know you've said it a million times already, but the granularity piece is super important. A brand might find that through their MMM that display isn't doing very well, and this, by the way, happens all the time. Like it's a real common thing where display hasn't been doing well in MMM, so potentially it gets cut. We speak to brands like we don't use any programmatic display anymore because we just don't think it's effective. Where attention and that can help as a use case here is, well, if you're measuring attention and you look at your the attention that you're getting on your display. If that's really far below the benchmark of what we see display typically getting, that could be your answer. You go, oh, well, that's why. It's because, we're buying rubbish display inventory. And of course, in display world, there is a lot of rubbish. It's one of the reasons why I think attention was probably embedded first there because it's just, there's crap everywhere with it. So if a brand were in that situation, they could say, well, why don't we try and get our optimized to get the display we're buying up into a certain level above benchmarks or to a certain level that we've found works, and then relook at it. And does that have an impact in terms of the econometrics data that we see?
Cool. There was another piece of research from last year as well. Won the Ad Wanted research category. I forget which one. That was published by Havas in association with Your Good Selves and Brand Metrics. So could you give us a bit of an overview of that as well and what you learned from that?
Yes. So I think the guys were on talking specifically about that one on a previous episode, weren't they?
Yes, we've had Anders Littner on with Mike. Yeah.
So that was and obviously we work very closely with Havas as a business, and John, who again has been on this podcast, I think, an attention advocate. Yeah. So now that piece of research, the title really suggests it was about looking at attention and memory. So what does attention mean for people's memory? And they looked at lots and lots and lots of different campaigns and brands on this piece of research. And the link they were trying to make is getting a certain level of attention, does that do anything to memory? And by memory, we were talking about things like awareness and consideration and recall, intent, exactly. So brand metrics were the brand partner, the brand lift partner there. So what they were bringing to the party was all the data around whether people had awareness and intent, etc. What Lumen brought to the party was just simply the attention data. We're able to measure, how much attention every ad was getting. What was interesting about it was because of brand metrics' positioning as a company, they have access. They sit more on the supply side, so they have access to a lot of publisher data. One of the reasons why that's really great is we have access to frequency data. So one of the most interesting outputs from this white paper was, I should go back. So there were a few learnings, and one of them is we saw that there was a definite link between people paying more attention to ads and having higher lift across all metrics. Now, some metrics went up higher than others, things like awareness, which is I think that's quite common because it's impossible to look at an ad more and be less aware of it. It's impossible to look at an ad more and remember it less, or recall it less. It is possible to look at an ad more and have less intent or not have a sharper increase in intent because, of course, other things come into play there, like the creative, the messaging, the price, how you feel about the brand, etc. But in all cases, we found there was a strong correlation between those things. We also found from that ads that didn't get any attention didn't have any lift, right? Yeah. So that was
again fairly obvious.
Again,
now we can measure it. Yeah. Didn't see it, didn't do anything. Yeah.
But one of the other things that was really interesting was bringing this frequency data in. So we typically, a lot of research has been done looking at ads in isolation, just in single ad exposures. And it's not really how advertising works, especially this particular piece of research was done across the web. And of course, across the web, you're likely to get exposed to lots of ads of the same ad. So what we found was that there was a link between attention going up and frequency. And actually, we looked at what you started to see a lift in was cumulative attention. So attention when you put together potentially a few ads where you had certain levels of attention. Now, what we also found from the paper was ads that didn't have any attention. It doesn't matter if you bought lots of frequency of them. They still didn't have an impact. They have to have a certain level of attention.
Back to your point that some brands say display doesn't work for us. They might be buying a lot of that stuff. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly right. So identifying how many ads you're buying with zero attention is really important there. But ads that have some attention, what we kind of call good enough attention, and when you start to put them together, they start to become impactful. And actually what we found was that, and this is in aggregate, right? So this was across lots of different brands. So it might be different for different brands, but in aggregate, we found that the trend was that for upper funnel, the real upper funnel, like awareness, you need a bit of frequency in there to get people to start having an awareness of your ads. Basically, you see a certain amount of exposures with a certain level of attention was very powerful at driving awareness. As you start to kind of go down the funnel into things like intent, where we're trying to almost more convince people of things, found that higher levels of attention might be required on single exposures. And again, I think this kind of is quite makes a lot of it's common sense. If you're trying to encourage someone to change their behavior or to go out and to perform an action, the chances are they probably need to look at the ad and understand what's going on, and look at the call to action and the messaging in there,
and stop doing whatever else they're doing in order to give it some sort of front of mind thought, right? Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. So that was one of the big learnings from the paper as well.
Yeah, cool. Last question: if you're working at a brand now, and that particular brand wasn't using attention metrics in any way, shape, or form, how would you use them, and how would you measure them? Measure the effect.
Yeah. So the first thing I'd say, let's go back over what we say about why would you use attention? Because I think probably if I was at a brand now and you see some of the stuff that's out there around attention, it's really good at predicting outcomes. And I might say, but I can already measure outcomes, and I'm getting really good at it. I've been using MMM for years, and so the first is just to kind of reiterate: attention is not an outcome. It is a way of predicting outcomes, or it's a leading indicator. So its use cases that if you're using viewability and clicks and video completion rate, or your agency's using those as a way to understand what's going on while your campaign's live in the hope that you drive effectiveness, attention is just much better at all those things. And there's loads of research out to show that. So that's the first thing. Like, attention is a leading indicator of outcomes. And then the other thing is really, I think maybe there's a hesitation that attention is complicated, and it needs to be really complicated. It's a big investment. It's a lot to talk about. We haven't got time to do that. Maybe it goes on the back burner. I'd actually say that to get started in attention, it's really easy, really easy. So you can't, if we could break attention down into two categories, no attention and some attention. So no attention would be zero attention. And as we've already said, there's research out there from us and other people. And also just fundamentally, people understand this, right? People not looking at an ad at all cannot be effective. Like, it cannot work. So the first thing to do is, we work out how many of those we've got in our media campaigns running. And that's relatively easy to do because Lumen data is now in every big agency's planning tools. So if you work with a big agency, WPP, Dentsu, Havas, Omnicom, our data's in their planning tools, which means you can start planning to attentive reach. That's a good step to start planning to actual attentive media and sort of trying to reduce the amount of wastage that you're getting. If you work with an agency that haven't just named, you can speak to us directly. But then you can also whilst campaigns are running, your agencies can monitor again the wastage, like how many of our ads are getting zero attention, and you can do that in a number of. You can work directly with someone like Lumen. Our data is now integrated with the likes of IAS and Double Verify. Most brands in the land use one of those, so you can start speaking to those guys about understanding where the wastage is. So it's actually really straightforward just to take the first step, which is let's find out how much of our campaigns have no attention. And what that will obviously naturally do is you can take that money and invest it into ads that are getting attention, which are more likely to be effective for you. So that's the first step. The second step is understanding the kind of some attention, which is greater than zero. Ads that get some attention greater than zero attention. Now, the same universal law doesn't apply with this, as we've already sort of talked about. Zero attention is universal, right? It doesn't matter if you're McDonald's or a challenger brand, new brand in the market. No attention is no good for anyone. But some attention, we need to understand how much we need. And in this world, it's where we start linking to outcomes. So that is work that we commonly do. And if I was working at a brand, I'd be starting to want to investigate. I'd want to understand, well, I already know what my outcome is, what I'm looking to drive, and what effectiveness means to me. And sitting down with someone like Lumen and saying, how would you approach linking attention to my outcomes? We'd start talking about how we'd go on an attention journey to learn that and what that would look like. The great news about that is once you know it, you start to become really like even more informed about what media you should be buying, and you start thinking about creative and what creative you should be putting in those different types of media. We've recently talked about. We've recently released a white paper around Christmas ads, so the best TV ads at Christmas over the last 3 years. For attention specifically, and what you find is there's a span from of these like top 20 ads. There's a span, but some of them get up to sort of I think it was like 40 seconds of attention, 40 seconds of attention. TV remains a fantastic channel for storytelling, but as we know, these sort of new channels, certainly in the social walled garden social channels, you do not get anywhere near the same level of attention. Does that make those channels bad? Absolutely not. Of course, there's lots of reasons why you'd use those channels. One of them being that's where sort of a lot of the young people are, but also extremely addressable, good value for money, etc. How do we best use attention in those channels? So that is an area that brands could start to think about. Like, if we understand how much attention we're getting in TikTok and Meta, should we be rebriefing our creative agency, saying, look, we've only got 2 or 3 seconds here. We need you to tell stories in that time. Should those platforms even be used for storytelling? I mean, our CEO, Mike, always talks about brands shouldn't be thinking of social platforms as extensions of TV and putting TV-esque creatives into them. They're not consumed like TV. Think of them like out of home. Think of the ads in social media as posters, because that's the amount of time that people pay attention to the ads, and therefore creatively you need to consider that. So there's lots of different ways you can go, but ultimately, really the first step should be, let's see if we can help make the plans more effective by eliminating wastage and moving that money into effective media. And then we go on this attention journey where we learn what does that mean for you as a brand.
Brilliant. Ben, thank you so much. Always a pleasure. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Onto the podcast. So I need to find out who was number 4 now and get them on the next podcast. But thanks for being on the podcast, mate. Much appreciated.
Thank you, mate.